Wait a minute. Well, we're talking today with Katherine Sherbrooke. Did I get that right? Sherbrooke?
Yes, you did.
Okay. And Katherine has written a very interesting book called The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly. Well, tell us what inspired you to write this?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. The book is inspired actually by my late mother, and it's by all the questions that I grew up having because she was a runway model in Hollywood in the 40s, but refused to talk about that time in her life. And despite the fact that I garnered through the years and sort of little things that she would let slip, that she actually knew quite well some of kind of the Hollywood royalty, Cary Grant, Bob Hope, Roy Rogers, that level, she would never talk about the time in her life. And she came home a divorcee in early 1950s with a child, which was very unusual at the time, and wouldn't even, who is my older sister, and wouldn't even talk to my sister about who her father was. So I always, obviously naturally had all these questions that can never be fully answered. And so I decided to take a fictional approach to the question of how does an ordinary girl from Newark, New Jersey wind up entangled in kind of the highest echelons of Hollywood and come home burdened by secrets. And so this story is a completely fictional answer to those questions while dropping in just a few of the breadcrumbs that I had gathered along the way.
Well, the characters are very interesting. Tell us a little bit about the circumstances surrounding the characters, Fernando, Christopher, without giving away too much, maybe Sam and Lisa or Lissa. How do you say that?
Lissy, yes.
Lissy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Aster Kelly of the title is a young woman who arrives in Hollywood, and actually her dream is to be a fashion designer, which is again unusual career path for a woman in the late 1940s. But Aster very much she's very creative and wants to have a career that takes advantage of her talents and her intellect. And so she arrives at the doorstep of a designer named Fernando, who's an up-and-comer in Beverly Hills, hoping that she may be able to gain an apprenticeship with him. And the moment he sees her, he recognizes in her immediately that not only is she this aspiring designer, she clearly must be a model. And not only that she's the missing piece that he's been looking for, because he's trying to win a contract with a major studio to outfit their stars when they're not on the screen. And he's looking for someone who looks just like Lauren Bacall to be his stand-in model for her. And so they both need something from each other. He wants her to be that model. She admits that, yes, she had modeled in New York City for a long time and wanted to escape that world. But if she does this for him and he wins the business, then he will mentor her. And so they become not only business colleagues, but very close friends as they both become romantically entangled in Hollywood. So she with a head of Galaxy Studios, the studio that he's designing for, and he becomes romantically entwined. He falls deeply in love with Galaxy's hottest up-and-coming star, Christopher Page, which is obviously a no-no in Hollywood. For sure at that time, at some level still is, but particularly back then. And so they help each other navigate this very complicated world where neither of them at some level can fully be who they want to be.
That's a very interesting plot. And I'm interested in how you brought about so many details about that era. And about Hollywood, the underpinnings of Hollywood, quite fascinating. How long did you research this, or how did you research?
Yeah. So this is my third novel, and so I've learned kind of through trial and error that the key is to build the story and then understand which parts, which scenes are critical, and then do the research to make them authentic. To have all those details, whether it's, from fashion, because there's clearly a lot of fashion in this book, and textiles, through to what it might look like on a soundstage in Hollywood. And so I really like primary research is how I think about it. So for example, Lauren Bacall has a wonderful memoir, which I read. So she gives, firsthand account of what it was like to be a contract actor at that time. I also love vintage magazines. So I got my hands on a lot of, Life magazines, Look magazines, etc. from the 40s, which just tell you so much, right? For the photographs, what they're writing about, the advertisements, it really sets the stage for what the culture was like in our country, and especially in its kind of gaze on these Hollywood stars and what was expected of them. So that was really fun researching those details.
You have a lot of conflict between all of the characters. Everybody wants something desperately, and of course that's good storytelling. But how much thought went into creating the conflict between the characters? Did that feel sort of natural, or how did all those pieces come together?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and there are two levels of answers for me. One level is I have no idea. Some of this just sort of comes out of the subconscious when you're living in a world, and I have some plot twists that I look back and think, where did that even come from? But I do think I'm really fascinated by stories where I like the word you chose, that there's conflict between character. There's these tensions between characters, but in great part, they all have really good intentions. So I'm less interested in obvious villains, right? And obvious women and the damsel in distress. It's more choices that people make to either they think they're helping someone else, or, doing the right thing for themselves. And then there are these unintended consequences that unfold that then they have to deal with, that they really almost have no one to blame for except themselves. Right. And yet they still have this great responsibility for these people who they love in their lives. And so therefore, what are they going to do about this? And that to me is just, in general in life, really fascinating to examine. And so getting the chance to do that through fiction and live in the worlds of these different characters, all of whom I care about very much.
Yes.
What are they feeling? What are they going to do now? Is kind of the fun of it for me.
Oh, absolutely. Now you write from two timelines, of course, in the 40s and then through the daughter's eyes. Was it difficult for you to put those two timelines together in some sort of easy flow?
Right. Yeah. So the second timeline, for those listeners who haven't read the book, takes place in the 1970s, and Aster's daughter Lissy is an aspiring Broadway star. So we're in New York City in Broadway in the 70s, which was it was a pretty gritty time to be in New York City. And so Aster's story kind of came to me first, although I knew that the story of her daughter was going to be very important. The structure took me a while to figure out, when to chunk up the story and when to switch timelines to make sure that the reader's not lost. They can really dive in to each character, but not get lost, and that those sections are in conversation with each other. And these stories really do mirror each other. They're both essentially coming of age tales of two young women who are on artistic journeys and trying to find their voice and what they want to do with their lives, while having really important relationships around them that they're navigating, including their own relationship, which is essential to both of them. And, how they struggle through different time periods when, Lissy as the daughter has a few more options than her mom, college educated, and the world has moved on a smidge in terms of what women are able to achieve, or even expected or allowed to achieve. And yet they deal with some of the exact same issues in their own lives, including how to deal with fame, what that means, sort of why we have these aspirations for ourselves. What are we really in it for? So I really wanted to explore that from two different.
Right. Now, you wrote your memoir before you wrote 3 novels. Was the memoir sort of practice for you, or did you learn a lot from writing the memoir first before you wrote the novels?
Yeah, so the memoir was sort of more of a personal project because I really wanted to get down onto paper. My parents had this turbulent love story because my mother came home a divorced woman with a child, and he was the only son of Italian Catholic immigrants who forbade him from marrying her. Said, "We will disown you if you marry this woman." So I always wanted to fully understand that story. And my dad has an amazing memory and kind of piece that story together. So that was done as a very personal project, but I learned so much through that process, not only from writing a book beginning to end, but I do think memoir can be really instructive for fiction writers, because really good fiction still gives you a slice of a very big world. So just like a memoir, for me, I knew what I knew. I grew, my parents are larger than life in my life. All my siblings, you have all this information, and you have to choose what you're going to focus on, what you're going to show the reader, and string together that piece of the story. And so I think really good fiction operates that way also, that the author needs to, and eventually, hopefully the reader absorbs it, sees a whole world. Even if you tell a 10-year story, you still know your character from birth to death.
Right.
You're just choosing that piece. And so memoir was really good practice or good reminder that any character that's created in fiction needs to have that complete life if they're gonna pop off the page.
And then you went on to win some awards for one of your later books, I think, your novel.
Yes, the first novel won some independent press awards, and then my last novel, which was called Leaving Coy's Hill, was just recently awarded honors in fiction from the Massachusetts Book Awards, which was just a huge honor. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you come from the corporate world, you run your own business. What decided you to move from that sort of role into creative writing?
Yeah. So I actually, when I wrote the memoir we were just talking about, I actually thought I was just on a break between startups, and that it would be a good time to gather this story about my family and spend some time with my dad. And that experience it really reinvigorated in me the dream that I'd always had since I was a child, to write fiction. So I thought I should give it a try, and I just haven't looked back, because I love everything about that, about the process. So kind of haven't looked back, and my career's taken a different turn.
Yes, it has. Well, tell us about the struggle along the way, about how in the heck did you find your agent? What were the circumstances surrounding that? And even after that, how many, or before that, how many edits did you go through? How did you convince him to take you on?
Yeah. It's publishing is a long journey for most. For some people, everything happens automatically, or very quickly, and that was not my experience. So my first novel took quite a long time to write. It, being the first novel, I was sort of learning the craft as I was going. And then finding an agent's really difficult. There's a process of querying, which all writers will know what I mean by that, and sending out letter upon letter and getting some interest, but not finding one. I mean, rejection is a big part of the game in publishing. And I always tell people who are stepping onto this path that not to be dismayed by rejection, because every rejection is that much closer to a yes, because there going to be a lot of rejections. You have to get out there and be willing. But like so many things that happen, a friend of mine sent the manuscript of my first novel called Fill the Sky to someone who she knew, who was actually an acquiring editor at Creative Artists Association, so who looks at books to turn into movies. CAA, and she read it, had some people in the office read it, and they all really liked it, and they said, this is a great story, but you need an agent first. Do you mind if I send it to this person I know in New York? To which of course I said I'd be delighted.
Yeah.
And he loved the book too, and sort of off we went. But that process was difficult. So Fill the Sky, as much as we were looking for a traditional publishing deal, that ended up coming through and being published by a wonderful small press in Boston. And then Leaving Coy's Hill, my next book, we were able to sell to Pegasus Books, which is a much larger publisher, and you know, associated with Simon & Schuster. So that's just been an incredible experience. And The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly is also coming out through Pegasus. So it's a wonderful publishing house to be.
Pegasus is a very good house.
Yeah.
And you know, you don't, when you think of publishers, you don't always think of that name, but that name should be right up there with a lot of majors.
Yeah, I'm glad you think so. They put out beautiful product in kind of in every way.
Yes.
Starting out, I think. Yeah. So
after you had your agent and you submitted, your agent is
Michael Carlisle. Yes.
At Inkwell.
Correct.
Yeah. After you submitted to your agent and after he sold it, did you have to go through even more rewrites at that point, or?
Yes. So I tend to do a lot of revision before I submit anything. I always say to people, the first draft to me feels like I'm about 40% of the way there. Most of the work in many ways is in revision. So I'd done a lot of drafts before any of these got to him. Then I would say, based on his feedback, I did one more revision each time before we submitted. And then inevitably, different stories on each one, I ended up doing even more revision. And then of course, once it gets into an editor's hands, then she also has ideas. So probably, you know, after I really thought I was done, there were still 3 more revisions, some bigger than others. But sometimes the smallest thing is a very big idea, or a very big idea can be communicated with a relatively small change. And that's where I think editors bring so much value, to be able to say, you know, here's this one thing I'd like to hear about more, or here's a loose end I'd love to see you wrap up some way. And sometimes it's adding 2 paragraphs. But the thought of, oh, I see how this connects. And so you have to, you know, go back and leave one tiny little breadcrumb in chapter 2 and add these 2 paragraphs over here in, you know, chapter 42. And it changes everything sometimes.
Right. It really does.
Yeah.
Now you head Grub Street Creative Writing Center in Boston, and you live outside of Boston. Tell us more about that organization, and how did it help you get published in some way?
Yes. So Grub Street, and to clarify, my bio says I'm chair. I just rolled off about a week ago. My term finally came to an end after 10 years. But Grub Street has been instrumental in every way. So Grub Street's headquartered in Boston, although through Zoom and other means, we teach anywhere in the world at this point. But Grub Street has classes on everything from craft in any genre you can imagine, from beginner through to significantly advanced. We have basically MFA level programs that students are now choosing over MFA programs. So in craft, also classes about the publishing industry in general. You know, how do you write a query letter? How do you, you know, market your book? All of those different things. And it's the largest creative writing center at this point in the US. So my very first novel, I started writing in a workshop class called Novel in Progress. And 10 of us, we happened to be all women, all starting our novels at the same time. And we kept enrolling for the same class with the same teacher because we kept wanting to work on our novels together. So it was a wonderful way to kind of grow up as a novelist with this cadre of people who were going through just the same thing, and then have people to talk to who were 10 steps ahead of us, who'd already published 1 book or 5 books, who'd already found an agent. And the community is committed to kind of helping everyone ahead of anyone, helps bring them along. And it makes it a community effort in many ways for something that can sometimes feel like a very lonely endeavor. So they've helped me in just countless ways. I'm confident I would never have 3 novels under my belt for sure without having found Grub Street.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
What encouraging words do you have for writers who are really struggling to find an agent or an editor?
Yeah. I would say, don't give up. Don't give up and listen to your gut. Like, if you have a story that was important enough for you to spend your time and your energy and your blood, sweat, and tears writing about, then it's an important story. And it's such a subjective industry out there. So, it's a bit of a needle in the haystack, because you have to find the right agent at the right moment, who's having a good day, who happens to see you at the right time, which can feel really daunting, but also I always encourage people to try. It's so hard, but to try not to take it personally when that's not, your book isn't the right thing for them. All of us, you and I could probably talk about 10 books that were huge sellers, and you might love one and I just don't, and another one that I love and you just didn't love. It's very subjective. So don't give up on yourself, and keep writing. As you're waiting, I've also learned this, as you're waiting and waiting and waiting and hoping for people to get back to you and hoping for someone to fall in love with your book, keep writing. Write the next project, because that's the only thing you can control, is sitting down, putting pen to paper or opening up the computer and continuing to write. And the more we can do that, then first of all, the more material we'll have, and the more you're keeping your artistic self alive, even if it feels at times like the rest of the world, isn't interested. They will be.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very inspiring. One more question. Tell us what you are working on now, or what's next for you.
Yeah, so I have a book that's been percolating in my head for years, and in fact, I put it aside for Leaving Coy's Hill. I put it aside again for this book, and so I know now that this is the thing I'm gonna have to tackle next. But these 2 books have kind of come out almost back to back, my last novel and this one. So I've been very focused on those 2, and then, but it's still working. I really believe you're still working, even when you're walking around or in the shower thinking about stories.
Right.
And so that'll be the next piece, is to then sit down and get the words on the page. So I'm looking forward to that. Well,
Katherine Sherbrooke, thank you very much for being with us today. And
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That's Katherine Sherbrooke, and she has just written The Hidden Life of Aster Kelly, just out from Pegasus. Yes, stop the recording.